Master of Darkness for the Sega Master System, otherwise known as In the Wake of the Vampire in Japan, or Vampire Master of Darkness when released for the Sega Game Gear, is often cited as being the poor man's Castlevania for those consoles, but in a good way. In fact, Master of Darkness is probably the closest thing to a Castlevania adventure Master System and Game Gear owners were going to get on their console of choice, and in this regard, it's actually a pretty good knockoff. Let's check it out. Master of Darkness places you in the role of failed psychologist Dr. Social, who has determined through the use of his Ouija board, no, really, he uses a Ouija board to determine that London killings attributed to famed killer Jack the Ripper is actually the work of famed vampire Count Dracula. And seeing that there's no other British blokes in silly suits brave enough to down the Count, Dr. Social takes it upon himself to do the deed, making his way through 5 rounds of 3 stages each, and equipped with a variety of weapons such as knives, pistols, bombs, and other assorted tools of devastation. So yeah, just by looking at the game, the general layout, the gameplay, you could tell that it's a derivative of the Castlevania layout. And if you've played any of the old school 2D Castlevania games, you'll feel right at home with Master of Darkness. You're basically plundering masks rather, for power-ups and weapons, battling undead creatures, climbing stairs, and battling bosses. The control scheme is also reminiscent of classic Vania control, right down to pressing up and fire to throw sub-weapons. However, beyond that, Dr. Social has a slightly larger arsenal of weapons than the Belmont clan, as he can equip himself with more varied main weapons such as knives, axes, and rapiers, along with a varied assortment of sub-weapons such as bombs and firearms. But yeah, controlling Master of Darkness is pretty solid for the most part. Only real issue is when it comes to climbing stairs. It takes a bit of doing to get your character to start climbing those stairs. Sometimes it works when it's pressing up and down, sometimes you have to press diagonally, sometimes you have to be on the sweet spot. It's the only real sticking point in an otherwise functional control setup. But on the other hand, you could jump off stairs. You also have more mid-air mobility, so navigating those platforms isn't going to be much of a problem, but the increased mobility and more modern weaponry doesn't dim the challenge. And make no mistake, Master of Darkness is as much of a challenge as the 8-bit Castlevanias were. There are times when you'll be subjected to some cheap shots here and there, but these can be overcome with some patience and repetition and skill. On the Game Gear, the game's slightly tougher due to the reduced screen resolution, which basically means you'll be seeing less of what's going on compared to the Master System version. Still, Master of Darkness does have that balance of difficulty that starts off easy enough at first, and gets progressively harder later on. For what it's worth, Master of Darkness looks pretty damn good. Even with 5 rounds of 3 areas each, there's enough visual eye candy and gothic scenery to admire throughout the game. Characters look particularly impressive and animate well enough for what it is, doesn't feel choppy or anything of the like, and there's some creative choices like the House of Wax dolls or the living furniture. In some strange minute way, the overall visual style and feel of the game almost harkens to the gothic and sinister scenery of those old Hammer horror films. It's a bit of a stretch, sure, but it just has that clean look to it that also exudes a bit of dark gothic design that looks to have been pulled from those type of movies. At least I like to think so. If nothing else, Master of Darkness nails the brooding atmosphere and feel that it wants to create here, and does it to a T. Oh yeah, there's also the cutscenes in Master of Darkness which advance the storyline. Very nicely done, and surprisingly well written too, and it really gets you into the game that much more, so yeah, extra points on that count. And so we come across the musical compositions of Master of Darkness, which is perhaps some of the finest music ever to come out of a Master System sound processor. No, really, it's that damn good, and much like the visuals and cutscenes, adds to the overall tone and atmosphere of the game. And it also helps that some of the tunes are just that damn well done, and also a bit catchy in a way. As for the sound effects, they're pretty standard stuff, nothing too terrible, nothing too impressive, they serve their purpose, and that's that. And that was In the Wake of the Vampire Master of Darkness for the Sega Master System, and also available on the Game Gear. And overall, this was a fun and well-made action platformer that should appease those looking for a good action game on either console. This could have been considered a worthwhile substitute for the lack of any Castlevania game on the Master System or Game Gear, but even on its own merits, Master of Darkness is a solid, well-rounded package with good gameplay, good controls, superb visuals, outstanding music, and just plain loads of fun to play. Definitely one worth checking out.